Hey everybody, I'm back today with a new YouTube video. This one is about porcelain doorknobs like this one and wooden doorknobs like this one. Some of the information that you'll see online about this is kind of vague about the history of when these were in production. So I'd like to give you a history of these two types of doorknobs, which were produced generally at the same time. And you know, sometimes people have these in their houses and they want to know what's appropriate to replace them. Sometimes if you work in a job like mine, you have to document houses that have these. And it's nice to know, are these original? Are they replacement? That kind of thing. And there's not a lot of good information about that. And some of the information is incomplete. So I'd like to sort of fill out that story a little bit today. This is the way that you'll usually see these on a door with one of these. This is called a cast iron rim lock. I'll bring it a little bit closer and you see how it works. Let me see if I can do this. When you turn the knob, it retracts the bolt, which allows you to open the door. So these two types of doorknobs, and each one of them has sort of sub-varieties, was produced in conjunction with this. All of this stuff works as a set, and without any particular piece of the set, it won't work. You have to have all of the pieces to make it work. Okay, so this is going to be a video similar to the video that I did about door latches, which seems to have been somewhat popular, which is why I'm doing this. Let me start with a really quick distinction that's important to make between these two things. Can you see that? Yeah, pulls versus knobs. Because a pull and a knob can look identical, but they operate differently. Generally, if something's on a piece of furniture, and here I'll show you one, this one is made out of porcelain. And the way this works is, if you put this on a piece of furniture, you can use this like to open a drawer, but this is not something to turn to operate a door. This is a pull. A pull only is something you just pull. A knob is something that you turn, like the one that I just showed you. By turning, you operate the bolt so that you can open the door. Okay. The reason that is important is because porcelain pulls existed before porcelain knobs existed. And this is central to the whole story. And porcelain pulls, if you'll notice, initially had a screw. I don't know if you can see that well. That ran through it, where it was attached on the inside of the drawer, wherever it was attached. This is something people thought was kind of ugly, and is the reason that porcelain knobs sort of gained popularity. A minor reason. There's a more important reason I'm going to get to shortly. But people didn't like having that visible screw head right there. Okay. One thing that I'd like to discuss is what people generally expected from doorknobs right before the porcelain knob was introduced. Some of you know that I collect house pieces for demonstrations like this, and as I was collecting stuff for today's video, I noticed that some of these I actually don't have one of. Which is funny because, I mean, if you saw all the house pieces that I have, you would think I'm some kind of crazy junk collector, and I have like 6 of everything. But I want to show you these. These are metal knobs that were in production during the Federal era, right before porcelain knobs were introduced. I hope this will come out. I went to a store that had a display case with some of these that I took pictures of, and they're kind of expensive, and for something that's just going for me to put in my own display case seemed like it was too much. So I just took pictures. I'm going to try to show you these. Okay, can you see that? Here is a metal knob from the Federal period. This one happens to be oval in shape, which was really common actually to have oval knobs. Let me go to another one. Here is a metal knob, and you'll see that it also has the screw that comes through all the way so you can attach it. And I have a third one. This one, okay, where I live, this is what I see the most out of these three. And they're all very similar. You can see this one has the same shape as a porcelain knob. It's kind of a flattened sphere, maybe. I don't know what you call that. Anyway, the thing about metal knobs, which are usually made out of brass, is they tended to get the oil from people's hands would tarnish them. And one of the roles that women did during the Federal era was to go through and polish metal doorknobs. That is the reason that porcelain knobs become so incredibly popular once they're introduced, because women don't have to go through and polish the knobs anymore. Now, the patent for porcelain doorknobs is dated 1841. So I'm going to show you something that I printed out from, it's the graphic that they supplied when they got their patent. So this has the names of the people at the top, and they have these four. So they're showing four different ways of like attaching maybe a porcelain knob. And you can see like this one has a little B at the top, has the screw going all the way through. So it's actually like this one. Now, each one of these has a different way of attachment at the bottom. And the point, what's important about this is these attachment options, I guess if you want to call it that, actually didn't work well. And the earliest porcelain doorknobs kept breaking off. This becomes a real problem because whenever a new product is introduced, it's always more expensive. So people were paying a lot of money for something that broke real quickly. And different people around the country started to experiment. Okay, how can we make this work? This really popular porcelain knob. How can we make the attachment work to the rest of the door pieces? So different people were trying this. And the people who had the patent would sometimes sue them in court to stop them from using porcelain knobs because they had the patent for it and their patent hadn't expired yet. Well, eventually they sued, and it led to a very important case that went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the point that the defendants made was, it goes back to the knob versus pull thing, because they made the case porcelain knobs pre-existed the patent, and they came up with people who were already selling them before 1841. Okay, well remember, these people were selling pulls, not knobs. So that part of the argument was really not true. But where they won the case is that the Supreme Court of the United States said that to be an invention, you have to have something new, not just a substitute of materials, which is what the porcelain knob was, a substitute of materials. It has to be a real invention, not change one small thing. I mean, it would be like, I don't know, taking Photoshop and coming up with one little change to it, and so you do a patent for your Photoshop? I don't know. So anyway, the Supreme Court overturned the patent. That meant that anybody could make and sell porcelain doorknobs, except they still haven't figured out how to work it. So an organization in Brooklyn in New York organized a, I don't know what you would call it, like a contest maybe, but it was an all-day event, and they had several things that like mechanics and engineers could come in and enter stuff in various categories of stuff that they wanted to do. The guy who ended up winning the porcelain knob attachment question actually had to give the money back because people showed that he used a French doorknob, which was already pre-existing, so he didn't actually figure anything out. Okay, but by the early 1850s, this is figured out, and I want to show you like all of the components. So here what I have is, this is called a set of knobs, one on each end. Okay, knobs have 3 required pieces and an optional piece, and I'll show you the optional one separately. So this is called the knob. Let me see if I can get out of the picture. This piece is called the shank, and this piece is called the spindle. Now, how this worked was, the knob was made in such a way it had a depression on the inside, and they would put an adhesive in that depression and then put the shank into that and let it harden, and that way the two of them would operate as one, the two separate materials. Now, I want to tell you something about the spindle. Spindles were small, I don't know what this is, sort of like a cylinder, but it's square the long ways, and it has these little holes because doors have varying thicknesses, and this way you can decide how far in to put your knob, depending on, let me see if, see there, maybe that would be the right hole for one door, but this might be the right hole for a different door. These spindles originally only had the holes like that on one end, not both, because initially that knob was permanently attached on the one end of it. So you got a knob and a spindle already attached, and then you had the other side where the knob was kind of adjustable as to where it went. But then people realize there's really no reason to do that. And so spindles start to be like this, and they have holes on both ends. Okay, one other thing about this is people started to use a little piece of, okay, it was porcelain, but what I'm getting ready to show you, I don't happen to have a porcelain one of these. I have a wooden one. This is called a rose or a rosette. This would go it would go along the door to kind of cover up the difference, that space between the door and the spindle. In fact, most of the time this would completely cover the spindle, so you wouldn't even see it. But I don't happen to have a porcelain one, I just have this wooden one. Now, in the 1850s then, these become extremely popular. And where I live, and I assume everywhere in the country, Italianate houses and then Second Empire houses would have porcelain knobs on their front door. They would be an exterior part of the mechanism for opening the door. And of course that was possible because, first of all, the spindle would work in these big box locks, but also is because the cast iron rim lock was introduced in the early 1850s. So now you have the entire package. that you can purchase to put on your doors. Now, porcelain knobs come in 3 primary colors and some variant colors. I've already shown you the white porcelain knob. There's also a black porcelain knob and brown, like this one. One of the subsets of the brown is this one that has like a swirl in it. This is called a Bennington knob. It's unclear why these are called Bennington knobs. Actually, because you'll see when you do, if you do an internet search, the Bennington knobs were produced in the potteries in Bennington, Vermont. So as part of this, I actually contacted the Historical Society up there and asked them when were these potteries in operation to get some idea of when these were being produced. And interestingly enough, the Bennington pottery that was producing porcelain went out of business in 1858. So what that means is that breaks the tie between these and Bennington, Vermont. Because these remain in, I live in a house right now that was renovated in 1920 and has a lot of Bennington knobs. So the knobs were in production a long time after the Bennington pottery that produced porcelain went out of business. So I don't know, that's a sort of a problem which other people have encountered too, that it's hard to really date some of these things because of a lack of information. It'd be super to know, for example, the black porcelain knobs began to be produced in a specific year, but we don't know that. One thing that we do know is that in the South, the colors represent something. I don't know if this is true in the North. I haven't heard it for the North. But a white porcelain knob you would put on a door that only a white person could go through. A black porcelain knob you would put on a door that only a black person could go through. And of course, a brown porcelain knob, anybody could go through that door. Now, there was one other color, which is at least where I live, they're rare. I've never even seen one, which was a cobalt blue porcelain knob. So I don't know, like maybe that was common in some part of the United States, but not in the Philadelphia suburbs anyway. Okay, after the Civil War, some various processes were produced so that people could make products out of pressed wood. Now, this leads to the wooden doorknob, okay? Some wooden doorknobs were not necessarily made by the pressed wood process. It's just that I haven't seen evidence that wooden doorknobs were in production before the pressed wood systems were being invented and patented by people. But pressed wood knobs are identical in their how they operate to porcelain knobs. Like here's a pressed wood knob. Or it could be turned. I would think that a turn knob, though, you would see a place, you know, you would see where it was attached while it was being shaped like this in the machine. I don't know. It's not super pertinent to what we're doing. Anyway, pressed or wooden doorknobs come in 3 general shapes. This is one that has just the same shape as a porcelain knob, but it's made out of wood. This one, which is sort of spherical in shape, is not quite as common. I mean, I've seen one house that had, I've been in hundreds and hundreds of historic houses. I've only seen one that had this. But these knobs, interestingly enough, if you have a person with arthritis in their hands, it's actually easier to grab this knob to turn it than this one. And then the third one is called the drum-shaped one. And this one is like a cylinder that's not very deep, and it almost always has the 3 grooves around the end. Now we know that these were in production by like the mid-1870s, and what I have here is a patent from 1891, and you'll see that as part of that patent it has a drum-shaped wooden doorknob, and they have some new way of adhering the knob to the shank. Now I want to show you this. This is an illustration, and it says below the illustration that these are pressed wood knobs. So this is evidence by 1876 that these were in production by that point. And what you'll see, I mean, this is kind of cool. I haven't seen this actual doorknob anywhere. You see that? The actual doorknob has a 1776 design inside of a star and a pretty good sized rose behind it. It's in a magazine that was called The Metal Worker, which you can find on Google if you're super interested. So you can see by 1876 they were sort of at the decorative stage of wooden doorknobs, which meant the production of wooden doorknobs already existed before that. Okay. Now, as we go into the 20th century, it becomes a little bit tougher to actually get your hands on either porcelain or wooden doorknobs. And the reason is that the companies that produce kitten houses started to order porcelain knobs in bulk, and they wanted to have them to ship out in the crates of all the house parts. So that makes it tougher to get a hold of them if you need a replacement in your house. Okay. So in the 20th century, porcelain doorknobs, well, okay, by about 1875, you don't see porcelain doorknobs on the exterior of the front door of a house. So, sort of halfway through the Second Empire period, porcelain doorknobs are limited to either interior or they continue to be used on the exterior of outbuildings. Then, in the early 20th century, the knobs seem to have gone out of production. I looked in newspapers.com for information about, I don't know, whatever people were saying about porcelain knobs. And the last time somebody has an advertisement in newspapers.com's database is 1921. So they seem to have gone out of production by then. One thing that happened too is a new type of, well, I mean, glass doorknobs sort of have a resurgence. This is an early glass doorknob, and one of the reasons, there are two things about this that are evidence that is from the early 20th century. One of them is, for some reason in the early 20th century, the shank of glass knobs are oversized. They become smaller over time. And also, this one has an iron spindle. The iron spindle gets replaced, and I don't know really when, but about 1920. And they start to look like this. Now, these spindles don't have the knobs at the end, but instead they're threaded. And so you would screw the knobs in from either end. I also have here a knob that kind of illustrates that. So you would screw them in, and then you would tighten the nut to kind of hold them in that spot. this is a knob from like 1935 to 1940. Okay, so what we have now is actually all of the pieces sort of go out of style, because the third piece we just talked about, it's hard to get the knob. They go out of production like 1915 or so. The spindle changes, and when the spindle changes, porcelain knobs and wood doorknobs cannot work with that spindle. They have to have the old spindle. And third is the cast iron rim lock goes out of production. In the early 20th century, people generally saw these as sort of things that you don't want to have exposed. And so mortise locks tend to replace these. And, you know, porcelain doorknobs can be used with a mortise lock. But the point of it is all of the elements go out of they lose their popularity and go out of production about the same time, in the very early 20th century. Now, I found an interesting article at newspapers.com from 1957 where a reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer named John Cummings had some broken porcelain knobs in his house, wanted to replace them, so he was going around talking to people in hardware stores explaining that he wanted new porcelain knobs, and he couldn't find them anywhere. And he went to this one place that was supposed to have everything, and they told him that they hadn't had them in stock for over 2 decades. All right, that was 57, so they actually ran out in 1937, which sort of points to the end of production sometime before that. So the 1915 date seems to be pretty good. Okay, so that's the history then of porcelain knobs. 3 different colors. You'll see these like 1853 to generally 1915 with scattered examples up to the 1920s. Wooden doorknobs introduced a little bit later, like maybe about 1870, and generally in production during the same time period. One thing about wooden doorknobs is people would often put them in their houses if they were like limited in funds, and then when they were able, they would get the porcelain knobs, which are a little more expensive, which mean these things, the wooden knobs disappear. In fact, a colleague of mine who's an archaeologist found one in an archaeological dig, and he brought it to me and said, "What is this?" And I happen to have one of these wooden, I think it was this very wooden knob that I showed him, and it's like, here's what this would have looked like. And he didn't know that they ever made knobs out of wood. Okay, so that's the story for you. I hope you found this informative, and if you did, I hope you'll give me a like and maybe subscribe or leave a comment. Okay, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time.